The conference hall fell into a sudden silence. Then, an explosion like thunderous applause erupted. The students stood up, shouting, whistling, some unable to hold back their tears. The young woman who had asked the question, Amina Ouedraogo, was the brightest student in the electrical engineering department, and now her eyes were filled with disbelief. "Mr. President," said Amina, her voice trembling with excitement. Is this really possible?" Traore smiled. "It has to be possible, Amina. We have no alternative." The projector next to the stage turned on, and a large map appeared on the wall. Burkina Faso's solar radiation map. The country was one of the sunniest regions in the world, receiving an average of 3,000 hours of sunshine per year. "Look," said Traore, pointing to the map. "We have gold, uranium, manganese, but our most valuable resource is this sun that shines on us every day, and it's free. No one can steal this from us." The next day, Burkina Faso's national media announced the details of the Solar Revolution project. The plan was bold, even crazy to some, to meet 100% of the country's energy needs from solar energy within 5 years. The revenues from uranium and gold mines would finance this transformation. A week after the announcement, a large meeting took place in the center of Ouagadougou. Energy Minister Moussa Zongo announced the first phase of the project. In the first year, we will establish microgrids in 10 rural areas. In the second year, all hospitals and schools will switch to solar energy. In the third year, we will establish large solar farms in city centers. After the meeting, Western diplomats immediately reacted. French Ambassador Jean Dupont spoke at a press conference. Burkina Faso's ambitious goals are commendable. However, its technical capacity and financial resources are not sufficient for such a transformation. France advises them to start with modest goals. Traore did not wait to respond. The same day, he spoke in an interview broadcast on national television. Western experts continue to underestimate Africa's capacity. They said the same thing in Sankara's time. "You cannot produce vaccines," they said. But Sankara did it. Now they say, "You cannot switch to solar energy." We will achieve this too. A few days later, Traore organized a critical meeting at the Ministry of Energy. Around the table were technical experts, engineers, and economists. "What are the obstacles ahead of us?" asked Traore, getting straight to the point. Energy Minister Zongo listed 3 main challenges. First, technical expertise. We don't have enough engineers for large-scale solar projects. Second, infrastructure. Our existing grid is inadequate to distribute solar energy. Third, financing. How will we purchase equipment despite the West's embargoes? A young woman at the meeting took the floor. It was Amina Ouedraogo, the newly graduated electrical engineer from the university. "With your permission, Mr. President," said Amina, trying to hide the excitement in her voice. "I have a solution to the technical expertise problem. In my final year at the university, I designed a training program on solar energy systems. With 6 months of intensive training, we can train hundreds of technicians." Traore listened carefully and nodded. "Amina, start your program immediately. I give you full authority." For the infrastructure problem, Traore proposed an unexpected solution. Instead of expanding the traditional grid, we will focus on microgrids. Each village will establish its own small solar farm and produce its own energy. This way, we will reduce dependence on the central grid. When it came to the financing problem, Traore took a bold step. "We will sell some of our gold reserves on the international market. However, we will only work with reliable partners. We have initiated talks with China, Turkey, and even India. The West financial system cannot stop us." At the end of the meeting, Traore gave the team a final message. As Thomas Sankara said, To achieve what seems impossible, we must first stop thinking it's impossible. The solar revolution is not just an energy project, it's a project of independence. The first results began to come in within 3 months. Amina's training program was more successful than expected. Young people from all over Burkina Faso applied, especially from rural areas. The program taught not only technical knowledge, but also community leadership and business skills. In Koulikoro village, the first microgrid was established. A small solar farm began providing electricity to the village's 200 households. The installation was done entirely by local technicians. The international media met Burkina Faso's solar revolution with skepticism. A BBC reporter visited Koulikoro and couldn't hide his surprise. Something is really happening here. There are now lights in the village, phones are being charged, and even a small cooling system has been installed. However, 6 months after the project began, the first serious obstacle emerged. Western countries imposed an embargo on the sale of solar panels and inverters to Burkina Faso. Human rights concerns were cited as the reason, but the real reason was obvious. Burkina Faso's energy independence was contrary to Western interests. Traore called his cabinet to an emergency meeting. "This was an expected obstacle," he said calmly. "We need to establish alternative supply chains." Energy Minister Zongo was concerned. "We can get panels from China, but their quality varies. Also, China may demand political concessions from us." Traore thought, "Local production. Can we produce our own solar panels?" Amina, who was present at the meeting, boldly suggested an idea. "Mr. President, we don't yet have the technology to produce our panels completely. However, we can do semi-production. We can import the basic components and assemble them here." Traore's eyes lit up. "This both solves the supply problem and creates a local industry. Start immediately." Within a month, an old textile factory outside Ouagadougou was converted into a solar panel assembly facility. The basic components came from India and South Korea, but the assembly was done entirely by the local workforce. Meanwhile, microgrids were rapidly spreading in rural areas. Within 9 months, 50 villages got electricity. In each village, a team was trained to manage and maintain the solar systems. On the anniversary of the project, Traore made a national speech. "When we launched the solar revolution a year ago, many people thought it was impossible. Now, 50 of our villages have light. 10 hospitals and 20 schools have switched to solar energy. And most importantly, we have seen that it is possible to produce our own power." The solar revolution was also bringing unexpected benefits. In villages that got electricity, small businesses began to emerge. Women were producing and selling traditional foods with electric grinders. Young people were setting up phone charging stations, providing internet access. One of the most impressive success stories was a cold storage facility established by a woman named Mariam Tapsoba. Mariam was preventing the spoilage of fruits and vegetables grown in her village by storing them in a solar-powered cooling system. This both reduced food waste and allowed farmers to sell their products at higher prices. When Traore heard this success story, he hosted Mariam at the palace. "Your entrepreneurial spirit is exactly what the solar revolution aims for," said Traore. "Energy independence brings economic independence." However, in the second year of the project, a new challenge emerged: the battery problem. Large capacity storage systems were needed to use solar energy at night. Lithium-ion batteries were expensive and created environmental problems. Amina, now the head of the National Renewable Energy Committee, found an innovative solution to this problem: salt batteries. Sodium-sulfur batteries were cheaper and more environmentally friendly than lithium-ion batteries. Also, the necessary raw materials were found in Burkina Faso. "This could be a game changer," said Amina, presenting the project to Traore. "If we develop our own battery technology, we both solve the storage problem and create a new industry. Traore immediately approved and allocated funds for a salt battery research center. Within a year, the first prototype batteries began to be tested. In the third year of the project, the solar revolution began to attract international attention. Neighboring countries like Mali, Niger, and Ghana sent delegations to examine Burkina Faso's model. Burkina Faso can be a model for Africa's energy independence, said the Niger energy minister during his visit to Ouagadougou. Your success shows that we can also succeed. Traore wanted to transform this interest into Pan-African cooperation. He proposed a project called Sahel Solar Corridor, a regional solar energy network covering Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Ghana. Africa's solar potential can meet all of the continent's energy needs, and we can export the surplus to Europe, said Traore at the regional leaders' meeting. But first, we must light our own home. In the fourth year of the project, the results of the solar revolution were impressive. 60% of Burkina Faso's rural population now had access to electricity. 5 large solar farms provided electricity to cities. The solar panel assembly factory had begun exporting to neighboring countries. Most importantly, the salt battery technology had been successful. The battery factory established outside Ouagadougou was Africa's first large-scale energy storage facility. However, considering that the goal was 100% renewable energy, there was still much work to be done. The industrial sector was still dependent on fossil fuels, and power outages were occurring in big cities. At the beginning of the 5th year, Traore planned the final move with his team. The last step is to transform the industrial sector, said Traore. For this, we will establish large-scale concentrated solar power systems. Concentrated solar power, CSP systems, generated electricity by collecting sunlight with large mirrors and producing high-temperature steam. This technology could meet the high heat and continuous energy needs required for industry. In the middle of the 5th year, Burkina Faso's first CSP facility was opened. The enormous mirrors rising in the middle of the Sahel desert captured the sun and converted it to energy. The facility could produce 100 megawatts of electricity per day. This was a capacity that could meet all the needs of a medium-sized city. At the opening ceremony, Traore made an emotional speech. 5 years ago, some labeled us as dreamers. How can a poor African country completely switch to renewable energy? They said. Today, we give our answer. With determination, intelligence, and solidarity. There was a special guest at the ceremony, Amina Ouedraogo. The young engineer, now the president of the National Renewable Energy Committee, was the technical brain of the solar revolution. Amina, you are the hero of this revolution, said Traore, hugging the young woman. Young people like you will illuminate Africa's future. At the end of the 5th year, Burkina Faso was meeting 85% of its energy needs from renewable sources. 75% of this came from solar, 10% from biomass and small hydroelectric plants. The 100% goal had not yet been reached, but even this was a world record. The International Energy Agency published a report acknowledging Burkina Faso's success. Burkina Faso has set an example to the world in the transition to renewable energy. This is not just a technological success, but also a success of political will and social participation. Western countries now respected the project they had initially met with skepticism. Some European countries even wanted to invest in Burkina Faso's salt battery technology. At the beginning of the 6th year, Traore gave a new speech at the university, right where he had declared the solar revolution. 5 years ago, we set a goal that seemed impossible in this hall, said Traore, looking at the crowd. Today, we have come very close to that goal. But more importantly, we have proven that we can determine our own destiny. At the end of the speech, Traore called a special guest to the stage, an elderly village woman, Fatima Sawadogo. Fatima was from Kulikoro village, where the solar revolution first began. "Mother Fatima, would you tell us how electricity has changed your life?" asked Traore. The elderly woman took the microphone in her hand and spoke simple but powerful words. "Before electricity came, our lives would end with the sunset. Now life continues after the sun sets. Our children can study at night. When we are sick, the clinic is open. And most importantly, we are no longer afraid of the dark." A strong applause rose from the hall. Fatima's words summarized the true meaning of the solar revolution. This was not just a technology project, but a social transformation project. Traore ended his speech with historic words. "The solar revolution is part of the independent struggle of not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa." As Thomas Sankara said, "Everything seems impossible until someone comes along and achieves it." And so, a goal that seemed impossible had become reality. Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in the world, had taken giant steps towards energy independence. The sun was no longer just a burning force, but a source of hope illuminating the country's future.